Hey guys, this is Evan from Gokadu coming to you with a Dutch angle here. So, do you guys have any friends? How many friends do you have? And how do you know what constitutes a friend, an acquaintance, you know, just somebody who you hang out with at work maybe? How do you quantify it? When does somebody become a friend in your life? This idea is very, 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 very complicated in Japan, and it's something I studied in university here while I was studying international relations and developmental linguistics, and kind of tied into that. I was in a class with about 20 other Japanese people, and we would read some like Japanese sociology, anthropology, Nihonjin Don in Japanese, which is like the study of Japanese anthropology, and kind of like Japan's place in the world, and especially from the Meiji Restoration in the late 1800s, Japan kind of got like thrown into being a part of the rest of the world kind of by force, honestly. And, that process of adapting, resisting, copying other people, kind of trying to have a unique identity from other people, and just that constant kind of contradiction, like towing that line, became a really interesting part of Japanese history, and kind of honestly was one of the reasons for World War II starting. And that kind of that sense of identity as well, and like how you identify, what is a Japanese thing, what is a Western thing, what is a friend. The line that exists between these definitions, that's the majority of what our class was spent talking about and what I wrote my final thesis on, which is, I talked about a little bit in the last video, the concept of enyo, restraint in Japanese culture, and how that word really only exists in Japanese and the way that it's actually used in everyday life. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Nihonjin no Nakama Ishiki by this lovely model of a man here who, yeah, I don't know why in Japan they always take like the most depressing pictures for for everything. Did you guys see the recent Japanese politicians, their lineup there with the penguin? Colin Farrell's in there too. But yeah, so in this book, the author is basically talking about the lines that exist between relationships in Japanese culture and the different levels that exist within like friendship within Japanese society. And something I wrote about in my thesis is kind of this line that is very kind of malleable compared to Western culture. I think in Western culture, it's generally kind of thought that somebody is seen as being inauthentic if they adapt, kind of the context of relationships or how they act around people in front of other people. If they make that shift in front of other people, it kind of gives you like that weird feeling, right? Like if you're talking to somebody and then they pick up the phone and they have phone voice. And they're like, they're talking in their normal voice, and then all of a sudden they pick up the phone, hi, how are you? That kind of gives you the little bit of the creeps, right? That is not a thing that happens in Japan. It's very, very accepted to make that shift in front of other people. I think that's the key, in front of other people. And that is how, kind of the dynamic forms around different relationships here in Japan. So, this author here, I'm going to be honest, I forgot how to read the kanji of his name because it's been 5 years since I read this book. But this author is basically talking about kind of when that transformation occurs and the different categories that exist within relationships in Japan. And there's kind of a wider range of these relationships as well. I think I didn't notice this when I was living in the US, but I think that we have a much higher floor for how we treat strangers in the US. Um, I mean, there's a lot that could be said about that. We have a lot of homeless people too. But I think generally speaking, there's kind of this social expectation to be friendly to people you don't know, and maybe even more so to people you don't know. Maybe you invite them and to something, and to include people. There's this kind of inclusion aspect that I found very interesting looking back, because what people say is that America is a very, very, very individualist country, but in certain senses, there's almost more of a sense of community in some of those initial steps than what you'll find in Japan, because In Japan, they have a concept called tanin. And tanin is basically like stranger, but it's kind of a classification for people that have nothing to do with your life, right? It's not about not knowing them. It's almost as if like you haven't established a relationship with that person, so there's no reason for you to calculate their position within your life. And so you can see some kind of sad things happening because of this. Because, for example, if you're riding the train in Japan, everyone is tanin, right? You don't know them, you've never met them, you're probably never going to talk to them. There is no reason for you to acknowledge their existence. But what I've seen happen more in Japan than I think would probably happen in the US is you'll see like, some old people struggling to like, carry their bags or something, and people just kind of ignoring them, or someone's like crying off on the side, like in front of the train, and they're just, everyone's just walking past. And there's this like level of detachment where like, it's a very uniquely Japanese thing where if you make the contact, people will be extremely generous, but before you make the contact, it's like you don't even exist, right? It's like you're, you're a ghost in the shell, you're a walking kind of inconvenience for other people to kind of navigate around. But at the same time, if you go up to somebody, you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, could you give me the directions on like where to go here?" They'll actually like physically walk you there, and they'll give you a bunch of a lot of help and tips and whatever. And so there's kind of this like on off to relationships that you just feel constantly here, and it's hard to pinpoint, but it's a very real thing. And so that basically is what this author is talking about, is another type of classification that's nakama, that's like kind of in between being friends. It's like in between friends and colleagues that exist within Japanese. And there's many, many other classifications of that, and kind of how these separations of classifications affect the way people think, the way people communicate, relationships, society, riding the train. It's very, very profound. And I spent years just in class with other 20 Japanese students just kind of discussing these things. And, it was interesting because to them, this stuff is just obvious. Like, it's like they don't even know how to talk about it because it's so obvious to them. But for me, it's just like, I was approaching this completely from the outside and doing it all in Japanese, reading a book like this in Japanese like once a week and having a 3 hour debate on it, and then going out and it's kind of funny. I can see it play out in real time, all the stuff that's being written about him. I'm in class, and then it's like this certain kind of like strict regime where you're like expected to behave a certain way, and then your whole class goes out with your 60-year-old teacher, and you all get hammered and you get beers and you act crazy, and people are like standing on the desk and on the table and stuff. So, that was kind of my day every day for years. And it was really cool. It was also exhausting. I mean, it was like to be the only non-Japanese person in that environment. It was like, yeah, it was kind of crazy. Like I needed someone else to be like to be able to like look at me across the room and acknowledge some of the weird stuff that was going on. But I do remember this book, and also the book I wrote my thesis on, Amairu no Kozo, by Takeo Doi, who also talks about another concept that only exists in Japanese, which I'll probably talk about later, called Amairu. And it's very difficult to translate, but basically is like the kind of, I don't know, the expectation you have on your superiors to treat you with a certain level of like, forgiveness for certain things. And like I don't know, your kind of like attempt to lower yourself to them, lower yourself beneath them so you can kind of enjoy that position of being forgiven or something. It's very difficult, but also I wrote about that as well. But yeah, I don't know, just kind of a rambling video, but I thought you guys might find some of that interesting. And, I'd like to make another video talking about some of this stuff more specifically, put some graphics on the screen, and also share some of my pictures in my class and stuff like that. But yeah, for now, I mean, I would just invite you to kind of question, like, how are you being influenced by the language you speak every day? You know? Like, if you're going somewhere, you're walking, or maybe you're jogging, or maybe you're running, or maybe you're sprinting. Are there more ways to say it? There's probably more, but like, why are there only 4 classifications, and where do we draw the line? this is also applicable to relationships and human behavior in general. And you kind of start to see this when you learn a really different language, is like how much you're kind of being steered into lanes all the time by just words and their definitions. And once you kind of break out of that, how interesting it is, and also kind of how scary it is to kind of realize that, yeah, maybe I don't have as much control over the way I'm thinking as I thought I did. And maybe by learning completely other languages, I can kind of expand those, those boundaries a little bit, even if other people don't understand it. And that's when the loneliness kind of aspect of language learning sinks in, because you're kind of like the only one who understands that if you're in a, in either environment, unless you're with strictly bilingual, trilingual, polyglot people. It gets kind of weird, right? So, yeah, just kind of a video about identity, word choice, language, developmental linguistics, and how specific words influence the way we think in general society. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know. I'm just trying to make videos here and not overthink it. So if you guys enjoyed it and you would like to hear more in-depth videos or watch more in-depth videos about my life in Japan, some of my experiences, etc., please consider subscribing and maybe check out some of the other videos I uploaded this week. If not, that's okay. I appreciate you watching this long. And yeah, have a great day or night wherever you are. Okay, thanks, guys.